Emerging Trends in Food Safety 2024. We're 3/4 of the way through 2024, which feels like a good time to review what's been happening in the world of food safety this year and do a little crystal ball gazing for the coming year. But don't despair, this won't be your typical food safety prediction article like the ones where pundits predict that industry-wide blockchain for traceability is imminent, that we'll soon be eating cultured meat and insects by the bucket load, or that every pack of low-priced food will soon carry smart sensors for detecting spoilage. Nope. Instead of trotting out those tired old predictions that never seem to come true, I want to talk about things I've personally noticed in my weekly scans of hundreds of food industry news items and remind you of the challenges that continue to emerge as we plunge towards the second half of this decade. The most impactful trend I've seen this year has been the increasing numbers of tricky microbial foodborne illness outbreaks that are being solved. By tricky, I mean outbreaks that would not have previously have been recognised as an outbreak, but rather as unrelated sporadic illnesses or perhaps missed altogether. The existence and sources of such outbreaks are being discovered using whole genome sequencing, which can compare the genetic fingerprint of pathogens in patient samples with microorganisms in environmental samples from food facilities, agricultural areas, and foods, finding links that wouldn't be seen otherwise. For example, in April 2024, 20 illnesses caused by Listeria monocytogenes, which had occurred over the previous 5 years, were able to be linked using genomic data analyses on the microbes isolated from patients and from sliced smoked salmon products from a single manufacturing site in Denmark. The outbreak strain was found in 4 batches from the same factory between 2021 and 2024, and in environmental samples from within the factory in 2023. Investigators concluded that the outbreak strain of Listeria monocytogenes was persisting within the environment of the smoked salmon facility and that the points of contamination hadn't been adequately identified or controlled. Such links between samples from different sources and over long timeframes would have been too expensive to conclusively prove until recently, when the cost of genetic sequencing dropped to levels that now allow it to be used for foodborne illness investigations, at least in wealthy countries. Similarly, epidemiologists in the US were able to link one brand of charcuterie meat to a salmonella outbreak that affected 104 people across 33 states in 2023 and 2024. And a deadly 10-year Listeria outbreak from white cheese was also solved using whole genome sequencing in 2024. Key takeaway. Food businesses that cause sporadic cases of illness from unhygienic facilities or poor food handling practices are now much more likely to be caught, with whole genome sequencing providing the smoking gun linking their products to sick patients. On to the next thing I'm noticing. In the past year or so, I've noticed an increase in the attention being paid to chemical contaminants and their possible long-term health effects on consumers. The health and wellness industry has been talking about these for decades, of course, but what's new is that mainstream food industry media is now also covering the issue. Or these issues, I should say. I suspect that this is in part because of the stellar work being conducted by the European Food Safety Authority, the EFSA, which provides independent scientific advice on food safety risks. Unlike the US Food and Drug Administration, the EFSA does not make risk management decisions, freeing it up to focus on the scientific aspects of each risk assessment, leaving the European Commission to negotiate the social and political ramifications of managing any risk it finds. Bisphenol A, BPA, exposure from food packaging is one area where food safety risks are being taken increasingly seriously, at least in Europe. In April 2023, the EFSA revised its safe intake recommendations for BPA down by a factor of 10,000, and 1 year on, the European Commission is set to ban BPA in most food contact materials. And just a heads up here, a ban on BPA in food packaging in Europe could be problematic for businesses that export canned foods and beverages in polycarbonate containers to Europe, since such packages often contain BPA. But it's not just BPA. Other low-dose chemical hazards which have been getting attention lately include micro and nanoplastics, lead and cadmium in chocolate, arsenic in rice, especially baby foods made with rice flour, and per- and polyfluoroalkyl substances, that's PFAS chemicals in packaging and food. For example, a study that links exposure to PFAS chemicals in early childhood with the symptoms of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD, was published last year. Around the same time, calls for the packaging industry to phase out PFASs in food contact materials reached a peak. Other food contact materials are also getting attention. Just this month, the United Kingdom's Food Standards Agency issued a warning about the long-term risks of exposure to chemicals in melamine servingware. The increased use of recycled plastics for food contact has also raised concerns about contamination of food from chemicals present in the recycled materials. As the food investment industry continues to hype insect proteins, so we're on to the next one. Insect proteins, as a solution to food security and sustainability issues, food safety experts are quietly working to explore the ramifications for allergic consumers. Because insects have chitin exoskeletons, the same as crustaceans such as shrimp and crab, there are allergen cross-reactivities between the two food categories. Work has commenced to understand the allergen profiles of different insect species. And by the way, as a side note, the most practical use for farm-raised insect protein seems to be as aquaculture feed. Currently, most aquaculture feed relies on wild harvested fish, leading to serious concerns about overfishing for aquaculture feed production. Terrestrial sources of food for aquaculture, such as insects, so that is food for the fish but grown on the land, could actually help prevent overfishing, and insects could assist there. Other continuing trends. Antimicrobial resistance in foodborne pathogens continues to be a growing risk, with every survey of resistance in pathogens finding a significant proportion of samples to be resistant to at least one clinically important antibiotic. This means that bacterial foodborne illnesses will continue to become more difficult to treat and will also be more dangerous to victims. Mycotoxin contamination continues to be a concern for certain commodities. With our planet becoming hotter and some food-growing regions becoming wetter, commodities in regions that didn't previously have mold problems are increasingly affected by mold and therefore by mycotoxin contamination. For example, in the past month, there have been 10 European notifications for aflatoxins in nuts and nut products just from the USA. Tropane alkaloid contamination of food crops from weeds appears to be continuing. Some commentators blame a climate change-induced increase in the number of flood events for spreading the seeds of weeds which contain tropane alkaloid toxins. Soybeans and leafy greens have been affected in recent years. And actually, the World Health Organization is currently calling for data in an attempt to understand the size of the problem. Risks from non-cholera Vibrio in seafood are increasing due to warming seas. Vibrio bacteria are found in coastal waters and can cause foodborne illness from the consumption of raw or undercooked seafood such as oysters and other shellfish. Rising sea surface temperatures in the US and Europe have expanded the bacteria's habitat, leading to new risks for seafood from temperate regions. Lately, when experts talk about Vibrio risk, their language has changed from could become more frequent to has become more frequent, with the US CDC reporting an 8-fold increase in Vibrio vulnificus wound infections in the eastern United States since 1988. And the final ongoing trend I wanted to talk about was unpasteurized milk products. They're not getting safer. Despite well-known risks and well-understood preventive controls for pathogens in raw milk and raw milk cheeses, the number of illnesses caused by these products has not declined. Recent outbreaks in Europe include Yersinia in raw goat milk cheese and E. coli in Mobia, raclette and tome cheeses. In the US, consumption of raw milk increased by more than 20% in the first months after news of bird flu in dairy cows hit social media. So far, no human cases of bird flu from raw milk consumption have been publicly reported. Takeaways for food professionals. New hazards, such as new forms of antimicrobial resistance, are emerging, and the risks posed by some old hazards are changing. For example, more people may be exposed to mycotoxins in cereal foods and Vibrio bacteria in seafood due to changing weather patterns and ocean temperatures. In more positive news, our industry is putting more effort into understanding the long-term risks of low concentrations of chemical contaminants in foods. Best of all, we're getting better at discovering the sources of foodborne illness outbreaks, so food businesses that cause illness are now more likely to get caught. In short, food safety trends for 2024 include more outbreaks solved with genetic techniques, an increasing focus on long-term health risks from chemical hazards, and growing knowledge of allergens in insect foods. Trends that have continued from past years include increasing risks from antimicrobial resistant pathogens, mycotoxin contamination, tropane alkaloid contamination from weeds, non-cholera vibrio in seafood, and increasing risks associated with raw milk, particularly related to increased consumption and bird flu related risks in the US. And I have got heaps and heaps of links to all the different examples that I've given in the email and the post if you want to check out any of the original sources.